She has published on a range of issues. I think a key area of her research that I see is that it's been on surveillance. And she has a book on our biometric future, facial recognition technology and the culture of surveillance. She's also published an edited volume on the new media of surveillance, co-edited volume with Shoshana Magnet. Is that right? Which was in 2009. I wondered about the new paper that she's working on, and she's just clarified that it is actually a spin-off of her work on facial recognition, which you can imagine would have a lot to do with surveillance, but also detection of different kinds of things. So for commentary, we have someone who knows a lot about crime, John McDonald, who's professor of criminology here and sociology, also faculty director at the Fels Institute of Government. John received his PhD. Wait, I didn't go through all the rest of where you got your PhD. At the University, Kelly got her PhD at the University of Illinois in the Institute of Communication Research. John's PhD in criminology at the University of Maryland. And published extensively on the use of force. I loved reading through his Vita because I learned about journals I didn't know existed. And some of the articles that he's written are things like interactive police-citizen encounters that result in force, published in the Police Quarterly. Or the police use of force in the Journal of Criminal Justice, or justifiable homicide by police and criminal homicide in the Journal of Crime and Justice. That's really cool, the Journal of Crime and Justice. So, as you know, if you've been here before, the ground rules are that our main presenter, Kelly, will speak for about 20 minutes or so. We hope that you've read the paper that's been available online. If you didn't, you'll probably give us some clues as to what the paper's all about. We'll then give John about 15 minutes or so for commentary on it. And then we will open it up for everyone. And I hope we are going to have a lively discussion today. The topic couldn't be more timely. Every day we listen to the media, we're hearing about questions of is use of force by police legitimate. So we're delighted to welcome both of our speakers, and let's give them a warm reception.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming and hearing me on my fifth and final public appearance at Penn this semester. It's been a great semester here, and I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of people in the Annenberg School, and I haven't ventured out that much. It went by so fast. So I'm literally leaving this evening after the talk. But in any case, thanks for coming, and I'm so glad that you're all here. I'm really looking forward to the comments on this paper, if you've read it, or if you just have some comments on what I presented it, my official summary. Very, very much a work in progress. And in many ways, it is, this is a kind of spin-off of some research that I've been doing. I won't try to explain how I got from facial recognition technology to the absence of data on police killings. That would take probably a couple of hours at least. But I do want to kind of give a little bit of a sense of where the inspiration for this particular paper came from. And I've been doing this research that I've sort of talked about throughout the semester on the emergence of this field of forensic video analysis. Video evidence is one of the most prolific forms of evidence in the legal system today, and there is a very big and diversifying field of video forensics emerging around and to deal with that video evidence. So this is sort of a project that came out of that. I first saw a story about the absence of data on police killings around late August 2014, in the wake of Ferguson, when a lot of things were going on there, and I saw this article posted on my Facebook feed, what I've learned from 2 years collecting data on police killings, by this person, D. Brian Burkhart, who is an editor from Marina News and Review. And it struck me at the time, I was doing some research, well actually I was co-editing a special issue of the journal Surveillance and Society on big data. And it struck me as, there's a lot of hype about big data, there's all these ideas about it, as if that because of the volumes, these troves of data that we have circulating around on server farms, we now have all the answers, all of the data that we need to answer all of the questions that we have about the world. And in fact, we can answer questions that we don't even know that we have, we don't even know the right questions to ask of this data. And this struck me as very interesting as a contrast to that kind of hype. That there was this sense in which there was what Brian Burkhart discovered when he went searching for data on police killings, and what he learned from 2 years trying to collect it, is that there isn't a centralized project or effort or database on police killings, and there is actually a lot of sort of systematic effort to not create such a database, and not to allow that kind of data and those answers to emerge from that data. So I also wanted to, Brian Burkhart in this piece talks about how he also, once he discovered the missing data, he decided to try to develop a crowdsourcing platform himself, by himself, with his own money, his own skills, and there were also a couple of such efforts circulating around out there, even before Ferguson and before the shooting of Michael Brown. So I want to talk a little bit about those other ones, but mostly I'm going to be focusing in this paper, if you had the chance to read it, it has taken the direction of the Guardian's effort. The Guardian's very professional, institutionally backed project to design and manage a crowd-assisted piece of journalism. In a sense, it's a kind of investigative journalism, and it's a crowd-assisted investigative journalism. It's an effort to crowdsource the database for 2015. But it wasn't the only one that was. It's not the only one, and it came about after I started thinking about writing this particular paper. Even. So I'm still trying to digest exactly what's going on here, what I might have to say about this, or what there is, what are the important issues here. So I also wanted to mention that, when I originally was thinking about this, I was reading a dissertation, the one on the left here that I have represented by a woman named Kim DeWolf, who is in the Science Studies and Communication program. She's finished now at UC San Diego, and she's writing about plastic waste in the ocean. And in fact, there's this idea that there is this trash island in the ocean, this giant trash island. So she went on a boat looking for it. They never found it. And in fact, there's really no evidence that an actual trash island exists. So she's reading this dissertation and engaging with this literature about about material absences, about how you study things that are absent. And also, this, at the same time, looking at this book by Ola Kuczynskaya, who is also a graduate of the Communication and Science Studies PhD at UC San Diego, and she's now at University of Pittsburgh, about what she calls the politics of invisibility. And she's studying the post-Chernobyl catastrophe, the hidden health effects of the Chernobyl disaster, specifically in Belarus. So she's also dealing with this sort of absence of data as well here. And they invited me to participate in a panel about absences. And so this paper, my first sort of iteration of it, was for a panel on the these just the kind of different kinds of absences and how to talk about absences at the Society for the Social Study of Science conference. Okay, so the fact that there were no reliable statistics on police killings became an issue. It wasn't the first time that it was recognized as a problem, but in the wake of Ferguson, and specifically starting around August 2014 and continuing until present, really, there's been a lot of coverage about the fact that there is no centralized database of police killings. So there was coverage in places like Gawker and Deadspin, but also in more conventional mainstream press. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, all did stories about this absence of authoritative, official, reliable data on the extent of police killings in the United States. And the fact that that really created huge blind spots in terms of how to make comparisons about, whether there was an upswing, if there was problem regions compared to other regions, city by city comparisons, and whether, in particular, there was police were disproportionately targeting black men, killing black men, and how to go about making that determination without data. Certainly seemed to be the case, but how, if there wasn't a kind of database for measuring it, how would that be verified? And that was sort of the question that was raised a lot. So it really seems strange that there was, to me, that there was a absence of data here, because if you just think about it on the surface level, it's like there really is an obsessive amount of paperwork on police. The police are required to document. They complain, I'm sure, a lot. Actually, they complain a lot about the amount of paperwork that they have to do, the amount of documentation that they have to. It's a very big part of their job. What is sometimes referred to as the knowledge work of policing. And it's also the case that I have some sort of images here. This is sort of transitioning. We're in the process of transitioning and moving towards something that we might call digital labor. That there is, this sort of documentation. Full disclosure, my stepfather is a retired Pennsylvania State Trooper, and he doesn't even he doesn't know what the internet is. He's a long time ago was filling out a lot of paperwork and cutting about paperwork a lot, but hasn't missed the whole stage of transitioning to the digital labor of policing. So the data produced by this type of police work, there seems to be a lot of data on police work, and it's the stuff of crime statistics, and it's being used. This kind of data is used for crime mapping and experiments in what's called predictive policing, applying computational techniques of predictive analytics to develop preemptive crime control tactics. So it just seems strange, given this kind of computational orientation to policing, this obsessive concern with documentation in policing, that how could there not be hard data on police killings? How could we not rely on big data and somehow provide us with these answers? Okay, so it also seems strange, given this proliferation of visual documentation of police activities, and whether we're talking about body cam video that's capturing incidents, or bystander video that's increasingly capturing more and more of what the police do. And it's really this sort of how to understand and evaluate the visual record in comparison to the data record that sort of is it somehow was sort of seen as an area of need. On the one hand, there's like a suspicion that this visual record might be distorted in somehow, and really need hard data to prove, to be a kind of counterbalance to the visual record. And of course, the opposite can also be, there's opposite assumptions that the visual record is, the truth, and that data can be corrected. So, but in any case, it seems like calls for triangulation here of some sort. How do we understand this problem in full view, this full complexity? So I mentioned Olga Kuczynskaya's book, and I really think that this is very beautiful. The way she's talking about the post-Chernobyl catastrophe in Chernobyl, interestingly, is very insightful and has some parallels in some ways with the absence of data on police killings in the U.S. So she uses the phrase production of invisibility around the long-term health effects of in Belarus and post-disaster catastrophe there. And what really prompted me to think about these two cases in relationship with one another is Ulrich Beck's statement that the number of Chernobyl dead will never be counted. So there are, of course, many contexts in which deaths are not counted. The number of people killed in wars, war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, the number of people who get killed crossing borders, crossing the Mediterranean. And I think that there's some sense in which these absences of deaths, the counting of these deaths are worth considering in relationship to one another. And why are there certain deaths that aren't counted? What can we say? They're not exactly the same, these undercountings or missing counts, but they are worth considering as in relationship to one another. And one of the things that Chinskaya sort of points out here, or argues in this book about the absence of, or the production of invisibility, or why are the Chernobyl dead not counted? Well, she argues that it's because there has been a systematic disruption of infrastructural conditions necessary for knowledge production about the health effects of the Chernobyl disaster. That the absence here, the absence of this information is not empty, that there's something to be found in this absence itself, that there are specific practices and conditions that produce the absence. So there's more to her argument and her study here about the invisibility of Chernobyl's health effects. For example, it's very important that radiation itself is invisible, and it requires special instrumentation to measure. It's imperceptible to the senses. But I think this particular aspect of it was really struck me that this is very important in thinking of it as a way of thinking about the absence of data on police killings. So there is this systematic disruption of infrastructural conditions necessary for knowledge production in the case of understanding police killings. Journalistic accounts have done some work here in identifying why there's a missing database here, especially The Guardian and various other news organizations have done some important work in going to try to find some answers here. One article quotes an FBI spokesperson explaining that the FBI doesn't have a mandate from Congress to make such an accounting, and that budgetary concerns would preclude the FBI from doing so. According to an ACLU spokesperson quoted in one article, the NYPD has fought disclosure of information regarding officer-involved shootings, arguing that it would violate the privacy of officers and reveal investigative techniques. Another article notes that there are over 17,000 law enforcement agencies in the U.S., and thus researchers aren't even sure how you go about setting up such a system to collect data from all of these different agencies. Another separate article cites 18,000 plus local law enforcement agencies, so apparently it's not even clear how many agencies. We can't count how many agencies there are. So an article in The Guardian identifies a part of the problem in the unwillingness of local police departments to file a report when they kill someone. So there's a lot of kinds of reasons provided, and there's probably many more questions and ways of trying to uncover this. There's probably some intentional, unintentional problems here, reasons. I'm not going to get into these. There are some death counts, FBI and the CDC. These are sort of determined to be kind of gross undercountings, and I'm just going to skip over that. So, and also, there's the questions about the term that's used to define what's being counted. This is certainly irrelevant, and it's not trivial because it matters whether you're counting. I like to use the term police killings, but that can also sort of use, it can reference police being killed. It's hard to find the perfect term to understand. Officer-involved shootings is another term, but that limits the count to shootings. And there are other ways, obviously, that people have been killed by police. Arrest-related deaths is another term that can be used. So there's a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of implications of that, and I'm just going to kind of gloss over that for now. So just returning to this crowdsourcing effort, and this sort of effort to create an alternate infrastructure, I think there's some interesting questions that this raises here. And Burkhart, he tried to do it himself, as an individual, and this is his site. You can go to this site. There's quite a lot of information that he provides. It's actually very interesting because he's gone to a lot of effort here to explain the different stages of this project and why it's been difficult to do a crowdsourcing project. There's a lot of problems with trolls and corrupted data for lots of reasons. And what is, just to kind of sum it up, what has sort of happened over time with his project is he's had to do more and more of the work and be very careful about what, he has to do a lot of labor himself in terms of evaluating the information that's given. The crowd, it can't be given over to the crowd completely because you end up with just sort of a bit of a mess. Okay, so this was another effort that Deadspin, some people at Deadspin wanted to start a crowdsourcing database. This seems to have sort of fizzled out. I can't really find any evidence that this one has sort of gotten off the ground. This one's a little bit more of a, this is another one that pre-existed Ferguson, and it is by an organization called Killed by Police. It's a very basic, it seems very basic in the sense that they have a Facebook community page, and then they have this website that just has a spreadsheet, and they've sort of collected quite a bit of data here. But again, it's not necessarily a lot of institutional backing in a professional project, more of a kind of citizen journalist style effort. Okay, so this brings me to the Guardian's Web project, which has really become like the focus here. I'm really interested in this experiment. And I'm interested in it as an experiment in kind of crowd-assisted journalism, as well as an experiment in kind of creating an infrastructure for police, police accountability and counting the, creating a way of creating a more accurate count, a more complete count of police killings. So the website is actually, if you have a chance to look through it, there's quite a lot of, they're doing a great job of covering this issue and this whole feature here. There's a lot of different material. Really, their aim in some ways is to sort of summarize it in sort of three main aims: to provide a count, to be able to kind of have an accurate, somewhat accurate assessment of the demographics of people being killed, and also to have at least some information, some of the stories behind the killings as well. And there's a lot of kind of efforts that they've made. It's a very well feature compared to the other efforts, these other crowdsourcing efforts. They have high production qualities. The interface is very designed as aesthetically pleasing and intuitive and easy to navigate. It allows for different ways of sorting and searching the data. A total count is displayed here. It's always displayed graphically as if it's rotating to the next number. It's always rotating to higher numbers. And you can, they break it down, they break down the killings by race and ethnicity, and they can also be viewed per million or by total numbers in each of these categories. To the right of that is a breakdown by state. The state, you can look at the killings by state, you can sort those in alpha order or by total numbers of killings or by per capita. Oklahoma is in the lead as the state with the most killings per capita, but there's a county in California that is in the lead for being the deadliest police use of deadly force county per capita, and they're doing a very focused feature on that county now, so it's allowed them to sort of identify these problem areas and focus in their investigative efforts, and they're finding lots of problems in that county, Kern County, I believe it's called. So it's a really, kind of very notable effort here. The interface also includes this sort of grid formation, and it displays rows and squares of each individual killed group by month, and then you can click on each one, and we'll take a little bit more closely at the end there. I need to sort of wrap up because I think you can click on individual squares and you get some more details, including links to other stories about this particular incident, and also a link to send us a tip to tweet this or to link to it. So, you know, they're providing this kind of way for users to interact with this information, and they allow you to send your own information. It seems to me that I have no idea how much of the information that they have on here is actually provided by readers or participants. My suspicion is that they're still doing most of the work themselves. They have a team of people working on this. The credits show a number of editors, a number of producers and web designers, and there's a large team of professionals, a somewhat large team of professionals working on it. Okay, so I guess I'll just leave with the question because this is a work in progress, and I'll welcome your feedback on it. I can say a lot more, but my question is this problem solved? I'll just pose to you. Does this provide, is this an adequate way of addressing this problem of the absence of data, data on police killings, and does this provide a credible alternate infrastructure of police accountability? And you know, what kind of questions, additional questions might be raised about this? Okay, thank you very much.
Obviously, it's a timely topic, but it's also one that a number of us who are criminologists have studied for quite some time. But then there's been kind of a lull in that research, and a lot of it has to do with the lack of quality data, I think. And this gave me a chance to go back and read some oldies but goodies, and so I'm going to quote a little bit of Jim Fife's work on police use of deadly force in my comments. Jim Fife passed away a few years ago. He was a professor at the CUNY Graduate School, and he had also been a New York City police officer. He was head of NYPD training. He was a professor here at Temple, and he made a lot of outside consulting as an expert witness against the Philadelphia Police Department in the area of deadly force. Anyway, in some ways I feel like it's a blast of the past because we're calling for the same demands for data that people were calling for in the 1970s in the wake of similar types of incidents of police use of deadly force, urban riots, and for a demand for the government to give us better data about who's killed, when they're killed, what are the circumstances, and how does it differ by population. So we do have data out there, and there's fairly rich literature in your knowledge, but I'll acknowledge that the data has its limitations. The two primary data sources are the Supplementary Homicide Report and the National Vital Statistics Survey. Now, the one thing I found really curious that the FBI director, Comey, came out and said they have no data on police killings. His own agency actually collects the SHR, but I guess no one briefed him on the fact that they had it. It undercounts. So both the data systems collect information, but they both underreport, and I think for different reasons. And I'm going to show you just an example. Well, you can't see that unless you have like bionic vision. But basically, the FBI sends this form around to police departments. It's called Supplementary Homicide Report, and they're supposed to write down characteristics of homicide victims in terms of demographics and the circumstances. And they have a field there for killed by police officer, but there's some confusion. One thing is it says justifiable homicide or homicide of a felon. So that makes the definition pretty narrow in terms of if the people are reporting it, they have to report it's specifically a felon. And in other words, there was a felony happening, the police killed someone. And as everyone in this room is well aware, that's not always the circumstance. So there's a definitional issue. It's also not really called out in any great detail telling agencies that they need to report specifically about police killings. It's just kind of in the text. Our other source, the vital statistics data, comes from death records. And so on a death record, a death certificate, so every time someone dies, the coroner, medical examiner, somebody has to sign off on their death. In some rural areas, that means maybe even like a funeral director of a funeral home. And what happens is you can code deaths by officers from these fields but they're open fields, and so there's a lot of underreporting. In other words, somebody doesn't necessarily write down, this was caused by a law enforcement officer. So there's great information from death certificates on the demographics, but we don't have a specific field that tells people, check the box if it's a police officer. This is just two simple suggestions would be, change these forms and get them in both so we can have both systems. There has been some comparative work looking at these two data sets, both in criminology and public health. There's a paper by Colin Lofton and his associates in American Journal of Public Health several years ago, where they look at underreporting, and they basically point out that the vital statistics data tends to underreport relative to the supplemental homicide reports, but it varies from area to area. There are some areas where the police report far fewer deaths than the data you get from death certificates. And my own kind of analysis of this suggests that it's often rural areas too, where I think this is just speculation, somebody could do some research on this. I'm not sure if the coroners realize that they should write, or if they're suppressing the information on police, or if they think they're passing a judgment call. I don't know what it is. But there's definitely some underreporting by major police agencies. For example, if you go back and look at SHR data on Cincinnati, which had a series of officer-involved shootings in the early 2000s and a riot that culminated from it, you'll see for the same year that they killed, I'm aware that the officers killed 5 people, they report 0 in SHR. So there's a missing data. On average, you see something like 300, somewhere around 350 reports a year in SHR, fewer in the NDSS. So my guess is that somewhere like between you're capturing probably about half of the deaths. Maybe only a third if half the deaths in urban areas, probably a third in the entire nation. But that's something we definitely need better information on. The data has limitations, but there still allows to answer some important questions. And evidence suggests, for example, from this data, even though it's underreported, that restrictive policies actually do reduce the incidence of deadly force. And here, I'm going to quote a paper from Jim Fife, just to give you an example of kind of the antithesis of restrictions. And that was here in the city of brotherly love. Former Mayor Frank Rizzo, flamboyant hardliner, as Jim Fife mentions, gave advice to his officers that they should break their heads before they break yours. And he was quoted a nightline saying, when I became mayor, the Philadelphia Police Department had only 1 shotgun. Now we've got enough guns to invade Cuba and win. So, why is that relevant? Because, I'll show you, actually I'll skip ahead and just show you the graph here. You can see it from Jim Fife's work in Philadelphia. And this is from internal data that he got from the police department. That there were there were 16 officer involved killings between 1970 and 72. Rizzo gets elected, goes up to a high of 29. They actually are involved in major litigation with the federal courts. It drops. That litigation ceases and it goes back up. This isn't an experiment, but there's definitely some regime effects. And during this period of time, the Philadelphia Police Department went from a more restrictive policy to a less restrictive. Basically what happened is the state actually passed a law saying officers should only shoot someone if they're involved in a serious felony. And the city, the police department said that was too vague, so they actually removed their previous restrictions. Some retrenchment. The law of the land, which amazingly a lot of people aren't aware of, including the media, is there's been some modifications to this. The primary Supreme Court case was Tennessee versus Garner. This involved a case where a fleeing felon, a juvenile, had broken into someone's house, burglary. He was running from the scene of the crime. An officer yelled, "Halt!" He didn't stop, and he shot him in the back of the head and killed him. Under Tennessee law at the time and departmental policy, that was completely illegal because the U.S., most states operated under some form of common law with fleeing felon rule. It basically said anybody fleeing the scene of a felony, if they don't stop, the police can shoot them. Seems crazy today, right? And the question then in the Tennessee versus Garner case, the Supreme Court actually overturned the fleeing felon rule and basically said that officers have to be more restrictive about this. And here's the actual quotation of U.S. law. Suspect threatens the officer with a weapon or there is probable cause to believe that he has committed a crime involving infliction or threatened infliction of serious physical harm. Deadly force may be used, if necessary, to prevent escape, and if where feasible, some warning has been given. So basically, officers are supposed to give a warning, and it's supposed to be a violent crime, where the officer has to feel that they're physically in danger. So that's the restriction. Jim Fife actually did some research 5 years after this ruling and found that most states hadn't actually changed their statutes in response to this. Most states' attorneys generals had not informed police departments of their policies or in violation of the Supreme Court. The advantage, though, is the law did change the law. It provided at least civil litigation. So if someone is shot, you can sue the police department. And that's how someone like Jim Fife, as a Professor Temple, ends up living in Princeton. That was civil litigation. So one paper that looked at this was by a former co-author of mine, Abraham Tannenbaum, who's actually a judge now in Israel. But he was studying criminology years ago, and this was his actual PhD. This was a paper that helped him write his PhD dissertation. And he basically looked at what happened after this Supreme Court ruling, using the SHR data with all its limitations. And what he found is that, on average, police shootings, killings, decreased by about 16% following the court's ruling. But what's very interesting about this paper is he's able to compare states where the ruling actually overturned the law, so they had basically a fleeing felon law, versus states that weren't affected by the ruling because they'd already restricted what the police can do. And if you just look at these two numbers, you see states that were influenced by the ruling, 24% reduction versus 13% in states that weren't influenced, and you get a difference of that by chance less than one time in 1,000. So suggesting that you restrict policies, there is some action. And again, going back to the Rizzo administration, kind of the opposite of that. But this is just deadly force, right? And this is, and it's certainly undercounted. The question that also came up in the paper is, what about other uses of force? And we really don't have national data on this. I've worked on research on myself. We have a publication in the American Journal of Public Health that looks at tasers and injuries. In order to get injury and force data from police agencies, you have to go agency by agency. There is no common form. Even with the assistance of the Police Executive Research Forum, we can only get reasonable data from about 25 agencies in the country, large agencies. A lot of agencies just don't report it in any kind of common form. So they do count crimes, they count tickets, but they don't have the same kind of capture system for deadly force or even for use of force. So usually what you have to do is go into did officers file for workman's comp, or do they have a force report? Now some agencies are creating these force reports. Here we found that tasers actually reduce injuries relative to other types of hands, batons, etc. So national data still are needed. I think it could be accomplished by making reporting more mandatory. We have a law enforcement, every year the Bureau of Justice Statistics sends out a national every 2 years they send out a survey of all major and small police departments. It's called the Law Enforcement Administrative Statistics Survey. They do have a record of every licensed police agency in the country. The last time I looked at it, it was like 22,000 or something. So they know where they are. They have their fax numbers. Now they have probably email most of them. And you could try to make it more mandatory. Now, obviously, we have a federal system, so how do you make it mandatory? The easiest way is to put a rider on any federal grants. The state or the local agency gets a federal grant. Part of that condition is they have to report who they shot, when the person was shot, their demographics, and that kind of information. You could also make, change the death certificate forms, or put an extra form on there, extra couple boxes, and ask people to fill that out. They're not making a judgment call on whether it was justified or not, but they could at least let us know if the person was killed by a police officer. And this paper made me really think a lot about the advantage of maybe doing both. So taking the crowdsourcing information, what's being collected by like The Guardian, The Washington Post has a pretty good website, taking some of those data and basically doing some form of capture, recapture. So what I mean by that is taking a list collected by the government agency, take a list collected from the media, and look for the missing cases. And then using that to estimate truly how many people are killed by the police every year. And I think that will give us some more purchase on knowing this information. All right, so one concluding thought, it's not my thought, but it was one Jim Fife wrote, is this is an important area. It's one that we need more research in. It's great the communications faculty are doing this. We need more people studying it, but we do need better data. And I don't think we should certainly use crowdsourcing, but we should also get the government to collect better data. It's not that hard. I just suggested 2 things. I'm not the first person to suggest this. Jim Fife and other criminologists and epidemiologists were suggesting the same thing in the late 1970s, early 1980s. It's 2015. Many of you weren't even born then, right? So, but I'll finish with a quote. He says, "Police officers and the people at whom they shoot are simple actors in a much larger play. When police officers' roles in this play are defined carefully by their administrators, and when officers have been trained well to perform their roles, their individual characteristics mean little. Young cop, old cop, male cop, female cop, white cop, black cop. All they know is the expectations, and then they'll do a good, basically says they'll do a good job. When such clear expectations are not provided, officers improvise. And often we get performances with bad reviews. Yet because we put them on the stage in the first place, we should criticize ourselves for failing to ensure that they've been directly and adequately trained." And so I think that a big part of this issue, again, is going back to policy, training, getting better data, but also making making sure that people are trained and aware of the law, not just garner, but all the rules of engagement. And one of the things that's really stood out to me reading this paper and just looking at current media is how little knowledge there is, both in the media, but also even in the police side on what is lawful. It's not lawful to shoot somebody because they're running away from you. But for some reason, I'll hear people on CNN saying that that's allowed. I'm like, no, we have a Supreme Court ruling. All right, I'll stop. I'm kind of getting emotional here, but but I think we actually know more than often the media is letting us realize. And I do think that crowdsourcing is a good way to try to get better data. So thank you very much.
2 papers. One on the media portrayal of police killings, and the other on looking at the data, apart from what the police are, or rather what the media are reporting. So, Kelly, usually we give you an opportunity to respond, and I think we should do that because we just heard a lot of the data that John is talking about. And before we open it up, we are going to open it up for questions in just a minute, but I thought I'd give you an opportunity if you want to take that application.
Well, I appreciated hearing all of that. It was really interesting. I hadn't really even thought about the death certificates question. And I think that, the things that you suggest about these changes to a form, these forms, the death certificates and the supplementary homicide form. I mean, I'm not a criminologist. I'm actually not here to make recommendations about how to create an accounting system for, I mean, I don't feel like that's beyond my area of expertise, beyond my field. And I am kind of, I'm interested in the, I think the crowdsourcing question and the crowd-assisted journalism is more closer to what I can sort of comment on, but I do think the idea of changing forms is interesting, and that being one piece of obviously a much larger set of changes that have to happen. I think a kind of profound question that still remains is whether collecting all the data will lead to any kind of change. And, I think on some level we have a lot of faith in that. We place a lot of faith in the idea that, if we have this more complete data set, we'll be able to identify, the problem better, or understand the problem better and solve it. But I don't know. I think a lot more still would have to happen beyond that than just having the data. I mean, in the paper, eventually I come around to, there was a blog post at Cyborgology by this woman at Rensselaer who basically argued, your demand for statistical proof is racist, saying that this is not, insisting that there must be proof that this is a problem. It is in itself sort of a kind of questionable way of looking at it. And then I also sort of gesture towards this other coverage that the New York Times did about community. What's more importantly missing is not data, but people. And the New York Times did this story on there's like 1.5 million missing black men from communities across the U.S. and obviously they haven't all been killed by the police. Many of them are incarcerated, but it's that's kind of that absence seems more important. That material absence of men and people from their communities and from their families. And so, I think that it's really important to really be able to address the data question and come up with the good data, and without losing sight of the other problems and other issues that are obviously here, and not put too much faith in, that once we're going to have this complete data, and obviously we don't have time.
Okay, so the floor is open for questions. Yes.
Thanks, that was really interesting. I'm currently looking at a situation in St. Louis County where the county is stepping in and has filed this ordinance demanding that the municipal police departments adhere to certain standards in training, in restrictions on use of force. I think is in there, and this is really seen by the municipal governments as an imposition from the outside by the county. So my question is, what is it about the police that is so central to our notions of self-governance and autonomy at the local level? Even if it's municipal versus county, county versus state, state versus federal. How we set rules for the police is really central to our notions of political identity.
Sure. Well, one of the things kind of interesting, Sam Walker is the historian about the history of police lives. The police agencies have been most resistant to consolidation. So we have far more police departments than any other municipal service you can think of. There aren't 22,000 fire departments. Maybe fire you can get volunteer departments, but in terms of, so there's been a lot of resistance to change, to consolidation, which does, and part of that is the police have relied on the public to block any kind of consolidation. So if you live in a nice town with a police department that you know and you like, the chief, then when they suggest consolidating, you say no, you vote against it, and they rally the voters. But that becomes problematic, as we point out, when it comes to doing things like changing the force policy, because they're resistant to change. They've been doing things this way, and who are you to tell us what we should do? Who's the county to tell this township what to do? Kind of thing happens. The one way that departments I've seen start to change policy is not. Obviously, Supreme Court sets the ground rules. In some situations, there can be legislation, but one area is litigation, where there's departments that they have most police departments have an insurance fund. They don't self-insure, and some insurers now require that they change policy so they're not as liable. So that's one avenue, which is basically getting the insurance companies to lean on to change the policy. Some departments don't even have written policies on deadly force, believe it or not. No policy. Just say, well, we rely on case law. And then you ask somebody, well, what's the case law? Well, I don't know. We don't know exactly, but maybe we learn in the academy. So there's a lot of room for improvement.
So, thank you so much. I have two questions. So, you mentioned the idea of crowdsourcing the data, and my question is, what does this particular, or the use of particular agencies or organizations crowdsourcing this data tell us about missingness, right? So I'm interested to know, who's collecting this data? If it's not through the government, right? What does looking at the actors who are doing it tell us something about missingness? And then at the end of the paper, kind of give us some, kind of suggestions of what this missingness tells us. And you said systematic destruction of infrastructural conditions for police accountability. And a part of that kind of says something about intent, right? So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to whether or not you think this is intentional, and also kind of break down some of these terms that you have kind of together, connecting that to this missingness of this data.
Are you saying messy or missing?
Missingness.
Missingness.
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to answer messiness. So the missingness. Okay, let me think. I think that the way the crowdsourcing and these projects are trying to kind of fill in the missing data and the missingness, sort of address the missingness problem. It's interesting in that. So I decided before the Guardian even launched Accounted, that when I discovered Burkhart was doing this project called Video Encounters, that I would go and try to do some work there. I would try to be a member of the crowd participating and follow some of the instructions. And he has all these instructions about how you can search for data. You can file a Freedom of Information Act request. You can Google, he provides some sort of parameters through which you might do some internet searches. And it really struck me, first of all, that it would take a very long time it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work to try to, find some useful information. And that, what I was going to end up finding, unless I was willing to start becoming a real investigative actor and filing these Freedom of Information Act requests, whatever, was I was going to find local news reporting, because that's what mostly was going to turn out from internet searches. And that's why I was still relying on local beat journalism, which are journalists who are relying on the police and have relationships with the police in reporting, and they aren't necessarily. And he even has this whole passage, and I think I have it in the paper somewhere, where he talks about, who's going to go into a dangerous part of town? Are you kidding me? At night on deadline? And it spoke volumes about sort of who the kind of white middle-class subject position of a professional journalist and the public that he's speaking to in terms of, although I understand that with the problem that he's gesturing at It's that there is, it's hard to, it's a lot of footwork is required to do this, to fill in the missingness, since it will dust the missingness of the data. And I was kind of inspired by this article about hackathons and the idea that this particular article, this author talks about how hackathons substitute code work for footwork. Hackathons are about, especially she's mostly focusing on hackathons for development projects in India. And they have these ideas that, these tech-savvy people in this little room are going to solve through some coding project a problem, a development problem or a problem in India around whatever, a lot of them, you name it. So, that there was an anthropologist involved in this hackathon that she was participating in, and he was like, we need footwork. This code work is not enough. And she was like, okay, yeah, this is interesting. We're trying to substitute code work for footwork. And there's a sort of parallel here in trying to substitute this computer work for the kind of work that would have to really be done. And, that it requires it requires being paid professionally to know how to do these things and having resources to do it. So I don't know if that answers the kind of conceptual question about missingness. But that what's missing and the intentions behind, what is their intent behind making it missing? And I think there probably are, at the micro level, intentions behind it, and then there are these systematic ways that it's probably the missingness is created. Whether it's not the right form or accounting system or policies or procedural justice, training orientations and things like this. So it's a lot of intention and unintended and unintended consequences. It's like a very wide combination. There probably is a lot of intent, and it requires kind of looking at multiple scales and ways in which there are, I think it's still an open question where the intentional erasure is. And there are places you can find it really systematically where they are hiding it and they are not recording, but that's not the whole picture. That's a part of the picture of the problem.
Thank you. So there are two places to me where I think thinking about information networks would be useful. The first is communicating the law and the best way to fill out forms to various police departments, and thinking which areas of the network of police departments are as well, which areas the second place is around the crowdsourcing initiative. You mentioned that there are links provided related to certain incidents. If you could gather those links of information, if you could verify that people contributing are good sources of information in general. So just start thinking about the networks of police departments. Or is there good data about all the police departments that exist, their interaction, and just have there been studies to analyze the network topology of police departments and how kind of dynamics between the platform?
There isn't anything that terribly sophisticated. I mean, there is some work on information flow between police departments. Typically, there's a lot of, something becomes popular and there's information flow. Typically, it does happen through membership organizations like the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, Police Executive Research Forum, and those sort of kind of like imagine it's like, doctors go to a convention and they hear about the latest. And so that's how it kind of things. And then there are police, most states have what's called a training standards kind of bureau where officers are supposed to get they're supposed to set standards for the state. And some of that information gets relayed. But Kira goes, but it's not mandatory. So departments can opt out and do their own training. It usually goes through membership organizations. But there's certain ways you can imagine improving that network and making it, start getting further, but then trying to encourage essentially other departments to copy better standards.
Okay, I have 3 people on my list right now. Aaron,
both of you see the kind of politics of the issues you're raising playing out. Like, if you were advising people that are deeply concerned about this issue or any of the many issues where there's tons of data that's not there because it's about poor people. I mean, I'm thinking what happens when the feds tear down public housing? What do we know about what happens? You know, do people find great new housing or what happens to their lives? Or what happens to the people who lose hand or whose food stamps get cut off? All of those sorts of things. All of them, people who care about these issues want all kinds of better data. Meaning within the Department of Health and Welfare, the way they keep data tends to be ridiculous. You know, the reasons people lose their benefits or whatever. What are the advantages and disadvantages of saying, okay, we're going to mobilize a base to figure out how to crowdsource this and get attention to this issue by crowdsourcing it and raising it up, versus we're going to figure out ways of using, this is the 21st century, there's ways to develop this data that's simple, it could be done, let's do it from the top. The way it should be collected by the government, let's get the government to do it, the data will be far better. Or when does one lead to the other? Like, it seems like part of the hope of the crowdsourcing is that's a way to put pressure on the government to do it, versus when the people get so absorbed with the crowdsourcing they forget to say, keep pushing. I'm wondering how you see those kind of dialectics as playing out, or whether there's other examples of those.
Well, I think in this particular case that James Comey, who's the director of the FBI, he keeps referencing the Guardian's project as a kind of embarrassing case of the Guardian having better data than they have. And, saying, there's some comment where he says, they know how they can measure the box office of The Martian, the film. Like, the box office is so meticulously counted, and the CDC has, epidemiological data about the flu, but we don't have this. And so he's sort of, I think there's a kind of, the politics of it, I think it is working somewhat to shine a light on a kind of weird incompetency that in comparison to either the market or this other federal agency, here's the justice system, the Justice Department, that just can't get it together to measure their own, domain. And so that politics, makes them look weirdly bad in certain circles, so he has to kind of try to shame decision makers into, this is my sense of it.
Supposedly a decision maker.
Well, right, but his power is limited in terms of compelling all of these. It's a very decentralized system of police agencies. So, it's kind of like, even if he was a king and a dictator, you still have to get the consent of the. So the politics of it is messy, in that sense. But I like I do think that there are all of these cases where there's missing data, and whether there is, it's so useful to have the data, but on the one hand, it's like we know the problems are there, and the data is important, but it's also, it's not the only thing that's important. And there's a lot of resources that go into dealing with the data problem, and then, what happens after that? Sort of the question I'm still a snagging question. There's so many more political negotiations that have to happen, probably beyond setting up accounting systems for all of these problems for those absences.
I think there are some examples. So the LA Times has a really, so the LA Times actually did this before even the Post, basically FOIA'd all the data on police officer-involved shootings and showed that the LAPD was vastly undercounting what was actually happening in their reports to the FBI and kind of shamed them. First, through a series of newspaper articles, but then the LA Times actually set up an agreement with the Los Angeles Police and County to share data. And that they now post including officer-involved shootings, they post it all online, including the victims' pictures and where it happened. And so there's an example of where like the pressure from the media actually forced the agencies to kind of open up. But you know, those are two big, the Sheriff's Department and police agencies that are large. It'd be hard to do it in Kern County, but as an example, smaller county. But I think but you could imagine major, crowdsourcing being a source of at least pressure. My only concern about the crowdsourcing data as like the gold standard is there's no auditor, and that's also true for the SHR. There's no one really auditing, and the FBI even, by the way, on the data, they say they cannot verify the accuracy of the data. They have a disclaimer, which basically means they don't even audit, call back, and view checks. They just kind of take it at face value. So, I think it's important. The crowdsource could help maybe pressure agencies, but then I still would like to have. I agree that having the data does not solve the problem, but at least gives you a way to do some comparative things like, why does Kern County have 5 times the police shootings than its neighborhood county? I don't know if that's the case, but you see these outliers, and then there's all kinds of ways that can lead to things to change, whether it's litigation, legislation, voting, voting government, the county putting pressure on the police department through the elected officials. I think there's lots of ways that those comparative numbers can be used. And one of the great things about kind of the crowdsourcing data is you get to picture people's pictures. So it's not just a matrix of numbers. You get to see, and they're like, they're not the vision that, people, when you see felon killed in line B, you think of like, somebody might think like, oh, bank, somebody with like a ski mask and a gun. You see like a picture of like a young guy or somebody who's really old and homeless. It's like, why this person, it humanizes, I think, the deaths in a way that is powerful politically.
Okay, so I have a number of people here. Maybe we need to reinstitute the rule. Matt, is it 2 fingers if you're right on the topic?
Oh, I've not heard of this rule.
Your follow-up question on the same topic, or if you have a new question. So I think we'll use, it's 2 for the follow-up. Okay, you have the follow-up.
I have a quick follow-up.
Both of you have follow-ups. Okay, you have a quick follow-up.
I have a quick follow-up is that actually what's not being said here is that 2 months ago, we have a pilot program initiated by Laura Lynch and the Bureau of Justice and Statistics. It's actually going to use the same methodology as the county in terms of crowdsourcing. And also the FBI 2 days ago has announced a new effort as well to expand its data collection efforts here. And what I'm kind of curious about is, we now have the federal government for different reasons now trying to come on board, 2 different agencies trying to collect this additional data and rely on this crowdsourcing methodology. The questions here that I was kind of wondering is, is this something that is a shift toward the politics of visibility versus invisibility? And can we really say that this crowdsourcing should be the methodology to go forward with rather than say, using our supplemental homicide reports?
Well, I would say that about that it just remains to be seen. First of all, I think because the Bureau of Justice Statistics, or that agency that's within the FBI, they've tried before and failed to actually, so it will remain to be seen if they actually succeed, really to have a sustained effort, I don't know if, honestly, although I know that the Guardian is relying on other crowdsourcing projects, it's still an open question for me, how much of this is really crowdsourcing as opposed to professional journalists or other types of professional paid people who are doing the information gathering and finding the sources of information that they can find and assembling this data. It's sort of leaning towards, it's like maybe a little bit, it's like what is the mix of crowd versus something else more professionally and institutionally organized? Because it kind of, there's like a kind of a spectrum here. So I think, if the federal government's going to have a crowdsourced database, that's strange. That's very strange. But I suspect that if they're going to have the way the Guardian's reporting it, because that's where I read it, they're going to have like this state by state kind of system where there's somebody whose job it is in a state agency to quarterly, call, I guess, all the police agencies to get the information. And it's not necessarily crowdsourcing. They're still gonna rely on a little bit some of the crowdsourced efforts that are already there as a way of, it's like verifying. They call it verified crowdsourced systems, so that they start with that and they use that a little bit, but there's still this kind of back end professional effort. And by professional, I just mean paid, someone whose job it is to do it. It's not like people doing it on their free time at night when they get home from work or something, or when they're employed. I mean, it's the data. What ends up is more scrubbed data in the sense that it's not just like trolls. There's someone sifting through the trolls to make sure that doesn't end up in the database. You can download the Guardian's data, by the way. They allow you to just download it.
Okay, so I have three people. Lisa, you're on the list, and then you're on the list too. So Lisa.
So my question is now a response to previous questions.
Fine.
What the article really brought up for me was what kinds of bodies are being rendered visible here. In the U.S. context, of course, it's disproportionately black male bodies, right? And I thought it was interesting the discussion that you start to have at the end about race and corporeality, but you're discussing the corporeal in terms of the absence of the black body from communities, right? And not so much in terms of the black body and the experience of violent death at the hands of police. So what this brought up for me is if you're going to talk about the infrastructural conditions necessary for knowledge production, which is the quote, then for me it seems like you need to talk about the racialization of bodies as central to this process of invisibilization. And you do say at the conclusion that this absence of police data reveals institutionalized racism, but for me there was a gap in the sort of analytical journey you take to get there because you're not focusing on the corporeality of the black body.
You mean the actual violent deaths?
Yeah, the violent deaths and why it is that black bodies are singled out. It also connects to a comment that you made earlier about one way that the police are legally allowed to shoot somebody is if they feel as though they're physically in danger, right? That's not a neutral statement, right? So, and the thing that, the danger that it that not addressing this brought up for me was that it almost affects a double instance of invisibilization. It's both, the invisibility in the sense of the absence of the counting, like the police side, but then also the invisibilization of the body, again, because you're not theorizing it as central. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that it's tricky. Yeah, I don't have access to the experience. And it involves a lot of speculation on my part to take that route, which, I'm willing to do. It's just that, okay, so one way that I've thought about this, because I keep coming back to this problem itself, is the kinds of things that cops, a refrain that's repeated is, this has nothing to do with race, this has nothing to do with race, this has nothing to do with race, this person who I killed, I'm white, and I killed this black man, and it had nothing to do with race. And I mean, there's a profile in the New Yorker of Darren Darren Wilson, who shot Michael Brown, and he said, I had nothing to do with race, this thing is in there. And so I think that's a really, my tendency is to say they're either lying or they're delusional or they're, but what is that? What is that statement? What is that insistence? That is an expression of something that they're insisting. I don't think that that's addressing the full scope of what you're identifying as a gap in this discussion, but it is this weird, it's one of the reasons why it's sort of pointing to why it's not it's a really difficult and tricky area to actually have evidence and talk about. I mean, you could certainly look at the stats and say, okay, per capita, black men are being disproportionately killed by police, and they're much more likely to be killed, they're among the people who are unarmed, they're disproportionately represented. But that's still a kind of looking at the data problem and not looking at the experience that you're referring to. And I mean, if the answer then, or the way in, is to just theorize it as this is a part of a historical sort of, problem that has, it's just, police have been on. I do think that police killings they're not anomalies. They're not easily administered or procedurally eliminated through training, because they are constitutive of a kind of racialized order and class-based and everything else. The police as a kind of institution, as an assemblage, is a precarious kind of thing in a liberal democracy, in the sense that it's always threatening to govern too much, but then it's like it's insisting on it's always engaged in the police are always engaged in a kind of legitimation struggle around these issues. So I mean, I think that there's other people who do a much better job of it. I'll just point in that direction. In the Afro-pessimist literature, put that into the paper. Maybe that would be a way of addressing it.
Well, you also gestured towards it when you mentioned the quote from the graduate student that you cite. And you say, a white woman can say it's a really dangerous neighborhood and nobody's going to question her. And that's quoted as it's a black neighborhood most of the time, right? Yeah. But if somebody says, I wasn't killed by the police and they're black, or I was killed by the police, or somebody I know was killed by the police and they're a black man, then that needs statistics to back it up, right? So that's so you do gesture towards the way in which race is so central in the way that people view the killings, but just not in it was just in the structure of the argument itself. It wasn't there, even though it was the kind of conclusion that you drew at the end.
Yeah, the paper is in development, and I will definitely.
And I really liked it, but that's it.
No. Thank you for that.